Hey guys, this is Gojo Crypto from the Daily Close. Thanks for stopping by. Today I want to talk about crypto, specifically what they are, what do they do, and why you should care about it. Before I get on to what I'm showing on the screen, I just wanted to talk about why I'm making this video in the first place. We're seeing cryptocurrency come up in mainstream media more so than ever before. Maybe it does feel a little bit sensationalized. We're seeing, news about overnight millionaires, people who put part of their life savings or their entire life savings into Dogecoin and suddenly became millionaires. And, a lot of us are asking questions. A lot of us are thinking, is this something I should get into? Am I missing out? The fear of FOMO is definitely real. And I wanted to kind of take a step back and demystify cryptocurrency for all of those guys, girls, ladies, gentlemen who are thinking about potentially investing in cryptocurrency. What I have in front of me here is actually, it's a book, and it might not look like it, but this is the online version of a book written by a guy called Jonas Hietala. Jonas Hietala, software developer, cryptocurrency enthusiast. He's also got this book up on Amazon if you want a paperback copy, or if you want to put it on your Kindle. I think he has it on Kindle. Not sure. But anyway, if you want to get the online version, this is the URL. Feel free to access it here. I really like this, and I really like this book for a few reasons. For me, it is a super simple, super easy to understand way of approaching cryptocurrency. If you are thinking about cryptocurrency as a place where you want to put some of your savings into, my recommendation is to always do a little bit of studying, do a little bit of research, because otherwise it really is a gamble. And unless you have that money to spend, if it is hard-earned money that you want to protect and want to give you healthy returns in the long term, then do your due diligence and make sure that you understand really what you're getting into. Now, if you don't feel like you are that tech savvy, or if you feel like, the information is dispersed across the web, I would recommend this resource as a start. It certainly highlights some of the main things that you should be aware of when it comes to crypto, without going too deep and without overcomplicating things. And the part that I really want to talk about is this part, which is why cryptocurrencies. Essentially, why should you care about crypto in a few short points. And I want to share my thoughts about each one of these points that Jonas has highlighted for us here today. Again, the purpose is not for me to deep dive into each individual coin, for example, that you might be interested in. My goal here today is to simply get your feet wet, get you understanding about why there's so much hype around cryptocurrency, and to get you started, hopefully interested in the idea of crypto, so that you know what you're getting into if you choose to invest money into it. So first off, why cryptocurrency? I am looking at, maybe I'll start here, cryptocurrency has excellent monetary properties. Before I can even talk about this, and you can probably read this on the screen, but I want to give some context around the history of exchange. In the early stages of society, we used to work in a barter system where goods were exchanged for other goods. Let's say I had a loaf of bread and I wanted to perhaps exchange it for something else. Someone who presented me with an item or a good that I also found had value for myself would have to be presented for me to make that exchange. And then we would exchange goods. It might be, a hammer, so I could build my house, for example. Now, at the time, it was fine because there was no other alternative. But the issue came up where, what if I didn't want a hammer and I had nothing in particular in mind that I wanted to exchange my loaf of bread for? Then what could I do? And what were my alternatives? Well, there were none until eventually we discovered some precious metals, precious materials, right? Like gold, silver. And then the next stage of exchange happened, which was we created coins out of these precious metals, and we used this to exchange with things, goods that we wanted. Now, well, why would I exchange this precious metal? Why would I accept, or why would anyone accept this precious metal for a loaf of bread? Everyone simply accepted that these precious metals had value, and by exchanging it, people had the belief that by holding this specific coin, that they would be able to exchange it for something else in the future that they wanted. They didn't need to make a decision about what they wanted now, nor did they have to wait for somebody to bring that specific item to them. So it did make the exchange a little bit more convenient in terms of time, and also in terms of being able to store those items, because you could now walk in a town into a market with 3-4 coins in your pocket instead of an assortment of random goods, a hammer, maybe your own dog, maybe some flowers, and in hopes that people want those things. I think the third big change happened with banks, and when banks eventually started to come up, we no longer had to carry around these lumps of metal. Instead, we were presented with currency, and the currency became essentially a receipt that the government basically promised to the holder is worth a certain amount. So if it were a $10 bill, you would have to believe, because the government said so, that this bill was worth $10. And then whoever received it, whoever had it, would be able to exchange it for something that was worth that much. The problem with currency, though, is that it is reliant, and I just mentioned this, it is reliant on the government. It's reliant on the banks for it to be fully functional. We're basically putting our faith in a promise made by the government. There was a step there is a step that has come after that, and I think we are in the midst of this, where we actually no longer rely on paper money or plastic money, depending on where you are in the world. Instead, the currencies have gone invisible, where we now have e-commerce websites like Amazon, where if you were to make some kind of exchange, essentially what would happen is your own bank account would basically write or show that $10 have been removed from your own bank account and $10 have gone into Amazon's bank account, and once that has been confirmed, you then can get your good. The place where we are right now when it comes to exchange is unique, because a lot of people are calling cryptocurrency the best form of exchange that we've ever seen before. And there are a few reasons for that, and I think it eventually goes down the list here. But monetary properties, so what Jonas is saying here is, compared to fiat money, cryptocurrencies have a limited supply, and compared to gold, cryptocurrencies are more portable, are easier to divide into small parts, and cannot be counterfeit. Now, we know that these are big issues when it comes to these paper bills, plastic bills that we have every day. But I think even more than that, there are other properties that make crypto a compelling replacement to the currencies that we have used, or that we're using here today. And so, why are cryptocurrencies better than money, or are they better than money? There is a criteria that he lays out here that's pretty interesting to me, but I don't want to go into too much detail here today. If you guys are interested, I can talk more about the comparison between fiat and crypto in another video, but the main thing that I want to get across is it solves a lot of problems that we see with money that we have today. So, for example, acceptable. If you have a British pound and you come over to Japan, you're not going to be able to use that money until you exchange it. And typically when you exchange, you lose part of your money's value in that transaction. Well, with cryptocurrencies and with Bitcoin, for example, if you were to make an exchange, as long as you were in an exchange, you're signed into, you have your own account in an exchange, and for example, you have a phone or a PC with internet access, you can essentially exchange money, send money, receive money, cryptocurrency, I should say, in any part of the world. And that's, in my eyes, quite revolutionary. It is quite insane how you could do that. When we talk about, for example, Fungible and uniform. Basically, fungibility is it the idea of being or having a fungible cryptocurrency is it something that you can recreate, or something, is there something else that can have the exact same value as that Bitcoin that you hold, for example? I want to talk about fungibility later on, but before I get too deep and before I run too deep into this topic, I think if we're comparing different kinds of fiat referring to the money that we know today, the coins and the bills that we have today, the British dollars, USD, Japanese yen, right, Chinese yuan, this is what it means. That's what fiat is. Gold refers to and is an example of the precious metals we were talking about earlier, and then cryptocurrencies, and then ranked, or scored, I should say, across all of these factors. It looks like cryptocurrencies do solve quite a lot of problems that we face with our fiat and gold standard that we used to have as well. If you want to read more into why that is, I would strongly recommend that you just go into this article and read through it. But essentially, it does what I think Jonas is trying to say, and I think it makes a compelling argument for cryptocurrency, is that it solves a lot of problems that fiat has. The next thing I want to look at, and maybe I'll just cover, I think I'm looking at time here, not wanting to run through too long. I'll lump some of these together. And what I want to talk about next is cheaper payments for anyone and anything, and maybe financial privacy. Let's lump those together. So the way that cryptocurrencies work is that they run through and are protected by cryptography, which is essentially the solving of puzzles, right? Cryptography and cryptocurrencies. If you're wondering why you can make cheaper payments with cryptocurrency, and if you're wondering why it's often referred to as a more private way of storing value and exchanging, making payments, and why it's accessible for in any kind of situation for anyone in the world, is for a number of reasons. Cryptocurrencies, if I take Bitcoin as an example, and you wanted to make a transaction with Bitcoin, the way that happens is the transaction is essentially recorded and stored in a block, which sits on the blockchain. The blockchain is something, or a blockchain is something that you would have probably heard about if you've ever done any kind of digging or research into cryptocurrency. Blockchain isn't a cryptocurrency. Blockchain is a ledger. And if you think about any bank that exists today, they have their own ledger. They have a list of transactions that say this money, or this person put X amount of money into this account, and now their balance is this much. They took this amount of money on this day, now their balance is this much. But instead of having a centralized bank hold all of those transactions and those transaction histories, cryptocurrency promises a decentralized way of storing that information on the blockchain. What happens is when you make a transaction on the blockchain, it stores information like where this amount is coming from, who is it going to, and what is that amount. Now, with that also comes something called a hash, which is a specific bit of code that is an identifier of that specific transaction, as well as the hash of the previous block or previous transaction that's happened on the blockchain. Now, why is this important? To put it simply, in order for you to make any kind of fraudulent activity, let's say you wanted to put more money into your account that didn't exist, or take money out of your account that didn't exist, the hash on this block changes if ever anything changes on that specific block. Now, because this ledger, the way that ledgers work in cryptocurrency is that it isn't a centralized ledger like it is in a bank. For Bitcoin, for example, there are about 1 million PCs running in the world right now that are solving these codes, essentially helping for these transactions to go through and recording it on those individual PCs. So there are at least a million different PCs in the world with this exact same ledger. What they do is they approve every single transaction that goes through. And because they're not connected to each other outside of this ledger, as in, I don't know, let's say I am somebody who is mining Bitcoin. And by mining Bitcoin, all that means is I am somebody helping put these make these transactions go through. And in exchange, I'm getting Bitcoin for my work because I don't know where the other miners are or who they are. Essentially, what happens is if there is any fraudulent activity and the hash changes, every single block, every single transaction that is linked to that after will change. And when there is that kind of change, we're flagged that something like that has happened. And unless 500,000 PCs, 500,000 people confirm that this change is correct, it will not go through. So instead of we see this every day in banks, right? There are people who collect your bank information and pretend that you're you, whether it's, identity fraud or whether it's any kind of scam. We've seen people collect that information and manage to steal from other people's accounts. And it by comparison, convincing 500,000 PCs, the reason why I say 500,000 is in order for any kind of change in the blockchain to go through, a majority needs to have approved that change. So in order for any kind of fraudulent activity to happen, unless 500,001 PCs say yes, it's not likely to happen. And so the chances are impossibly small for any kind of fraudulent activity to happen. The other thing is, so that's why it's very private, right? That's why, so I should say not private, I should say safe. That's why transactions on cryptocurrency on the blockchain are so safe, and why cryptocurrencies are safe in comparison to traditional banks is because of this approval system and because of this worldwide ledger that operates to uphold the security of the system. And it links to cheaper payments. If you are somebody, let's say, sitting in South Korea and you wanted to send money over Puerto Rico, well, you can. We see cases where if you are located in a remote region where there are no banks, for example, where there are no established financial institutions, and you wanted to send money abroad, it was impossible until today, until cryptocurrencies came into existence. The fees that you would encounter when making these kind of transactions, let's say I want to send Bitcoin to someone else across the world, are significantly smaller than the kind of exchange rates that you would experience if you were exchanging fiat. So not just sending fiat, but also exchanging, but also the interest rates that you would get, for example, if you chose to borrow money. Essentially, with cryptocurrency, you can take that money that you want to lend it to someone, and you could do that. You could lend it to anyone in the world without there being an intermediary. You don't have to set up an account. If you wanted to, hold your money somewhere secure, and let's say you didn't have proper ID or that traditional financial institution could allow, well, now cryptocurrency has made it so that you can keep your savings in a form that is still accessible, that is not regulated by banks, and as long as you have an internet connection, a phone, a tablet, or a PC, you'd be able to access anytime. So the other thing sorry, my PC is bugging out and it's changing its lights on me, but there are issues that we find and we've faced with bank accounts, and I think if even expanding beyond that, the financial system, when it comes to the way that our financial system works right now, we're essentially, we've seen this multiple times, right? With the financial crisis in 2008, with the Lehman crash, We're essentially relying on a promise, like I mentioned with currency, right? We're relying on the promise of the government, and if they have the capacity, the capability to keep printing money when they wish, we are at the mercy of that. Cryptocurrencies, and the way that it's written here is, they represent an alternative without a central authority that can manipulate the money supply, and they can be used to truly separate money from state. Separating money from the state isn't that unique of an idea. I mean, we see it with the euro, right? The euro is managed by the European Central Bank, and when it comes to the decision making of the the ECB, I should say, the countries that use the euro have, maybe I should say, most countries using the euro have very little say in the decision making of the ECB. We can look at gold, for example. Gold is not something that any one entity, one government in the world has exclusive control over, which also makes it separate from states. And I think the thing about this is, if we're thinking about money being separate from the state, what we want to do is simply control the way that supply is being managed. If we go back to prehistoric days where maybe shells were used as a form of currency in exchange, anyone could suddenly find a mountain of shells and become a millionaire, a billionaire, or the equivalent of that back then, overnight, and that would drastically affect the actual value of the individual shells. So that's, I think, if I went maybe a little bit bigger here, and if I were to look at the last point I want to make around extensions here, is the use cases of cryptocurrency don't just stop in making our flow of currency much more manageable, much more accessible, and also allows us to have more autonomy with the money that we make. But cryptocurrencies come in all sorts of forms, and you would have heard already about tons of different kind of coins that exist in the world today. But to me, they all have a similar mission in mind, and that is to challenge the status quo. That is to look at our existing systems and where the bottlenecks exist, and how we can take control of those systems where possible. It's hard to say where cryptocurrency will go from today. It's hard to really predict whether or not this will be the ultimate revolution that we anticipate it to be. Only time will tell. But what we do have are signs, and what we do have is greater awareness. What we do have is buy-in from the organizations that seem to stand on the opposite side of cryptocurrencies, and a lot of development and belief that this is potentially life-changing technology. But whether it's something that will affect us immediately, whether it's in the next 10 years, whether it's in the next 50 years, it really is hard to say. But just because we didn't know the power, for example, of the iPhone when it was first released, did not mean that over time, with these people buying into it, with these people realizing its effectiveness and its use cases, that it, who would have thought that it would eventually dominate the way that we view mobile communications today, and the potential of such a device. So where I want to end off today is, first off, I am hoping that I might have been able to incite some excitement within you, maybe have gotten you to think about reading more or understanding a little bit more about cryptocurrencies. I also feel like it is akin to something like the internet boom, or the .com boom, I should say, that happened in the 2000s. I believe that when it comes to these kind of monumental changes and these kind of massive innovations in technology, it doesn't hurt to be aware. It doesn't hurt to educate yourself. And also, in a time where there is a lot of volatility, what comes with that is a lot of opportunities to earn as well. But again, I caution that this should come with a combination of understanding, with a combination of equipping yourself with knowledge about what you're putting your money into. Over time, I want to continue to create content that can simplify some of the more difficult concepts around cryptocurrency, in the hopes that maybe we can explore this together. So I will leave it at that for today. Once again, thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.